It was the dawn of the third age of podcasting, 30 years after the series had launched.
The Babylon podcast was a dream given form. Its goal, to discuss the place where humans and aliens could work out their differences peacefully.
It's a port of call, home away from home for established fans, newbies, John, Blaine, and guests.
Humans and aliens wrapped in 2,500,000 tons of spinning metal, all alone in the night.
It can be a dangerous place.
Wait, what?
But it's our last, best hope for peace.
This is the story of the last of the Babylon stations.
The year is 2024.
The name of the podcast is
Babylon 5, 30 years later.
Hello and welcome back to a brand new episode of Babylon 5, 30 years later. This is the podcast that usually takes us through every episode of Babylon 5, 30 years after it was produced. However, we live in this current wasteland of no episodes. And so we are covering other media that was released around this time. And who are we? Well, I am John Wilson of John Wilson fame. You know, John Wilson Incorporated, John Wilson Industries. Got lots of stuff going on for me, including this podcast empire that I run with my good friend Blaine Dowler. Hi, Blaine.
Hi, John. How are you doing?
All right. I don't know what all that was about just now, but it sounded good at the time. We are going to talk about a novel for Babylon 5 that came out around this time. It's hard to know exactly with mass market paperback novels of this era. Usually they're released sometime during the month that was printed on the copyright page. And this is a May 1995 copyright page. So our most recent episode of the show aired at the end of May. So this probably came out sometime during those last few weeks of the that season 2 segment that we just covered recently.
Yeah, we don't have the exact date on this, sadly.
Nope. And the way I understand from the Star Trek side is there would not have been an exact date. It would just ship when it shipped. Nowadays with digital communication and everything, you know, releases always being known, you can know exactly when something's going to arrive on the doorstep of the stores, but not so much in 1995. But what is the novel we're covering? It's Accusations by Lois Tilton, the second of the series.
Yes.
Do you have any experience having read anything by Lois Tilton? I've read her DS9 novel.
I actually don't believe I do yet, and I have come to understand that's an oversight.
Yeah, she's a pretty solid writer. I remember reading her book in Deep Space Nine range called Betrayal, and I remember liking it, but I don't remember a whole lot else besides that, because most of the Star Trek books that I've read, I read them in rapid succession, and they kind of bled together in my brain. So I had emotional reactions at the time, and then 6 months later, I could not have told you what the book was about.
Yeah, her Wikipedia page says that she's written 4 of her own novels.
Mm-hmm.
That one Star Trek novel, Betrayal, which spent 4 weeks on the bestseller list. Oh,
good. So that would have been a strong one, yeah.
Yeah, Babylon 5 Accusations was her one Babylon 5 novel, and a variety of short stories published in Asimov's Aboriginal science fiction, amazing stories, weird tales, realms of fantasy, paradox, the year's best science fiction, Women of Darkness, Borderlands 2, Adventures in the Twilight Zone, which might have been how she grabbed JMS's attention, because he's a huge Twilight Zone fan.
In 2005, she was a finalist for the Nebula Award for a short story called or a novelette, because it was from the best novelette category, called The Gladiators War. So, and also that same work was up for the Theodore Sturgeon Award and the Sidewise Award. So she did not win those, but she does have some acclaim for her work. So anyways, she wrote a Babylon 5 novel, and we read it, and it was pretty good. It's funny because coming out of the last novel, we were kind of uncertain what this would be as far as covering new ground, because the last novel involved a lot of accusations. And while this does also involve a lot of accusations, that it really does not feel thematically or story-wise anything like the previous book.
Yeah, I think aside from having Garibaldi heavily involved in both, because there's a mystery involving crime, so that makes sense.
Yeah, because he's a security chief.
Yeah, and having another member of the crew framed for the crime.
Right. But that doesn't even come up in this one until like halfway into the book.
Yeah, but really those are the two pieces that overlap.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of new direction. Looking at this, the only thing that is a little bit confusing looking at the cover art, Jakar might be the most prominent face on the cover, and he has almost no impact on the story.
I think he's in a scene in the entire book. It may be that he's on the cover because Babylon 5 is kind of known visually for those two alien races, the Centauri and Narn. And so just having him on there kind of helps to say, this is a Babylon 5 book. But yeah, he's a non-entity in this book.
Yeah, that having Garibaldi and Ivanova on the cover makes sense because
they are the two biggest players.
Yeah. The narrative structure is largely, I think it's one is odd, one is even, but we'll alternate chapters from Garibaldi's perspective and alternate chapters from Ivanova's perspective.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, this came out in May, at some point in May 1995. We're covering it at this point because we're sort of spacing out our episodes during this gulf between broadcast coverage, because there were no episodes being broadcast during this part of the year in 1995. So, but it would have come out calendar-wise just a little bit earlier than what we're actually talking about it. And then the next book comes out just before the end of the year. So we have one more novel to talk about before 1995 and 2025 wrap up. But anyways, shall we get into the nitty-gritty of what happened?
Yes, we should.
So, Blaine and I, in our experimental discussions of how to treat these novels, last time kind of summed up the book overview, and this time we tried writing brief synopses of each chapter as it went along. So we've got a beat by beat kind of the plot mechanics of the book. So the first half goes something like this. Ivanova gets a message from an old friend named J.D. Ortega. He was her instructor, her flight instructor at one point during the early part of her career. And she asks to meet because he's in trouble. Whenever she goes to meet him, though, he misses the meeting, and Ivanova asks Garibaldi about it, only to learn that Ortega somehow got on the station undetected, despite being a suspected Free Mars terrorist. So Ivana leads the Alpha Squad on a mission to rescue a transport, a Cassini transport, from some raiders. But she arrives too late because the raiders were extremely well prepared and they had hit that transport hard. A bit later, J.D. Ortega's naked corpse is found stuffed into a locker, in an Alpha Squad locker, and Dr. Franklin was able to determine that he was, in fact, murdered. The time of death is right at the moment when Ivanova was supposed to meet him. She was supposed to meet him. She waited in the meeting room for an hour, and he never showed. Well, it turns out he was killed right at that time. Ivanova identifies the poisoned body of Ortega, gives copies of identification, and Talia Winters confirms that those who discovered the body were not involved in killing him. They just have questioning that she helps out with. Garibaldi discovers a partial note written by Ortega, but he and Ivanova can't decipher it. It's a partial word, hard-wir, hard, W-I-R. Captain Sheridan tells Ivanova the Cassini was transporting morbidium ingots, and morbidium is a made-up, strategically valuable metal, which reinforces the idea that they were set up because the raiders came and got the metal. Ivanova's investigation discovers the transports of strategic metals out of Marsport, like the Cassini, were getting frequently attacked by raiders, suggesting that there's a leak at Marsport about when these raiders are moving. She tells all this to Garibaldi, who informs her that Ortega was murdered in the bathroom, connected to the ready room where she was supposed to meet him. Captain Sheridan then closes the investigation because a team from Earth Central is coming to take over. When they arrive, Garibaldi greets the team with as much formality and as little cordiality as he can manage. They're definitely not welcome. He then warns Ivanova to be careful when they question her. He then starts looking down below for possible leaks on how Ortega snuck onto the station. Ivanova is, in fact, interrogated very hostilely by Lieutenant Miyoshi on the team. The team is run by one Commander Ian Wallace. Garibaldi discovers that all of his security files pertaining to anyone connected to Mars have now been restricted from his access. He confronts Commander Wallace and Captain Sheridan, and Wallace returns Garibaldi's access in return for Ivanova's suspension from duty on suspicion of being involved with Ortega and the terrorism. After reading of Wallace's report on why she's a suspect, Sheridan reluctantly agrees and relieves Ivanova of duty. So Garibaldi visits Ivanova to comfort her, and in talking, they realize that Earth Central Team's suspicions make a disturbing amount of sense. If you're like an outsider looking in, on paper, what they're saying makes sense. The recycling center reports a human foot got caught in the system. This is an unusual situation, of course. So Garibaldi has it scanned, and it belongs to a person named Feng Shi-young, who is registered as having left Babylon 5 several days earlier. So apparently he left Babylon 5 without his foot. But then Garibaldi determines the records were faked, and Young was likely already dead when he supposedly left, having been stuffed piecewise into the recycling center. He asks around about Young, but his informant that he talks to down below is close-mouthed in fear of Wallace's team. This is Nick Patinos that he talks to. So Garibaldi asks Talia what role she's playing in Wallace's investigation, because the Patinos was, scared of their brains getting scanned. So Talia is working with Wallace to help. She goes to Captain Sheridan to express her concerns over the role that she's playing and the investigation procedures themselves. So Sheridan calls Wallace in to ask him about it, but Wallace just blows off the captain's questions. Sheridan assigns Ivanova to continue investigating the raids on strategic metal shipments from Marsport, and she and Garibaldi deduce that the raiders are being backed by Earth Force, the military structure that they all work for, and that Wallace is actually running a cover-up regarding the raiders. And Captain Sheridan has received word from on high to cooperate wholly with Wallace. At one point, Garibaldi breaks up a fight over a cheating poker game. He questions the guy who was cheating using a card scanning implant and finds out that he was on Mars at one point. So he asks him about Mars and about Feng Shi-young, finds out that Feng Shi-young did work there as an enforcer.
So that is the first 15 chapters of the 30. From that point, Ivanova leads Alpha Wing to protect a cargo transport from Mars, fighting off a predicted squad of raiders, and Garibaldi runs into scared people in his investigations and is knocked out from behind. Ensign Taurus reports to Captain Sheridan that Garibaldi missed a meeting 3 hours ago. They search and find Garibaldi tied up and stuffed into a locker. Taurus had told Sheridan as much as she knew about the investigation, so Garibaldi fills in the captain, leaving out the Mars connection. Then Wallace shows up. Wallace demands Garibaldi's arrest for interfering in the Ortega investigation, but is stymied when Sheridan insists he's investigating another murder, which Wallace admits and insists is wholly unrelated. Garibaldi shares all he knows with Sheridan, but it's all coincidence and speculation. The cargo captain confirms with Ivanova that the raids seem like a part of a cover-up and extends the theory to include defraudment of the insured value of the strategic metals. She shares the theory with Garibaldi. Cargo Captain Paul is arrested by Wallace for questioning and the ship detained for a forced inspection, so the cargo crew calls Ivanova. She negotiates a peaceful inspection, but only after the captain is returned. Wallace fails to uncover what he had hoped to find on the cargo ship. Garibaldi is distressed to learn Sheridan has locked up most of Garibaldi's informants while trying to find out who attacked him. Garibaldi questions Nick Patinos and learns he knows more than he's willing to say, but gets the name Val Williams. Also, the Earth Central file on Feng Shi-young has been classified, probably by Wallace. Ivanova leads Alpha Wing on another escort. Raiders lay a diversion trap, but she sees through it, and her squadron take out all the raiders save one prisoner. Garibaldi's request for info on Val Williams is also denied as classified, but Garibaldi is able to ask about a suspected alias, Joseph Nagy, and gets the file and confirms that it's the same guy. Garibaldi and Torres find him hiding on a ship bound for Mars, and they arrest him off the books. Garibaldi's interrogation confirms a lot of the dots he's been connecting. Then word comes in that Khatib from Wallace's team has been murdered. Ivanova interrogates her captured raider, who confirms most of what she suspected. Except the insurance fraud, these are legitimate shipments being set up for raiding and reselling on the black market. Wallace creates a scene in MedLab demanding Khatib's autopsy be classified, but Sheridan has had enough. He and Garibaldi search Khatib and find evidence linking him to Young's murder, but are called away by a riot. The people of Babylon 5 are fed up with the mass arrests. Sheridan sets everyone free whom Wallace has arrested and orders all future arrests go through him. They return to MedLab to find Wallace tried to confiscate the evidence from Khatib, but Franklin tricked him into the quarantine lab, where he was able to use some knockout gas to render him unconscious. Ivanova returns to the station with her raiders prisoner, and Garibaldi catches her up on the plot. Things come to a head as Ivanova's salvage, her captured prisoner, is interrogated in the presence of Talia Winters, and Wallace is arrested on charges related to murder. Sheridan gets hints that there is still something bigger going on that he wasn't supposed to know about, which is why Wallace is being sent back to Earth. Ivanova is still not permitted to resume her past duties. In an act of desperation, she asks Talia to dig into her memory and hopefully find out what that hardware was supposed to mean. Ivanova realizes that Ortega's note meant that he hid information in her ship. She retrieves it, only to be ambushed by Lieutenant Miyoshi in disguise, who was a member of Wallace's team who was supposed to have left B5. Talia felt the danger and had help arrive in time. The information is super science, element 156, an advanced form of morbidium that would revolutionize the weapons industry. Humans now have the information about it, but it's too advanced for humans to have developed it themselves. And then our final chapter is just a brief day-in-the-life glimpse that lets us know Ivanova has been allowed to go back to her regular duties in her old position.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised because it takes up pretty much the entire page. So it looks like the first page of a chapter, but then you turn the page and it's blank.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is a mystery plot, murder mystery. And like a lot of mysteries, as you're going through the story, you're uncovering information and your characters are finding stuff out and you're learning more things. But then we get to the end and look back on it. A lot of it is kind of, not a whole lot happens that doesn't directly relate to uncovering information. So it's not like this is a plot motivated story. It's more of just a murder mystery.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a fairly straightforward murder mystery, yeah. So a lot of the meanderings are just your regular red herrings, like the idea that maybe these crates wouldn't actually contain morbidium and it was all a scam against the insurance companies.
Right. Get the raiders to steal stuff that isn't actually morbidium and then claim that your super valuable cargo was lost to raiders and collect the insurance money. That's just one of the things that they suspected along the way that turned out not to be true. One thing about the whole murder mystery structure that I feel like Tilton might have dropped the ball on, and I'm not going to complain about this book very much because I actually rather enjoyed it. To have Garibaldi and Ivanova come up with ideas of how things were working that they couldn't substantiate. So at some point during the story, she has to just give them a place where they can substantiate it. I felt like made a little bit of things redundant because when you get to the scene where they're able to substantiate things with the like, for example, the raider or the Mars guy that Garibaldi arrests, they're going through information that we actually already have. So you're going through the information twice. But, such was the nature of the story. And it's fine. It was just one of those kind of, hallmarks of storytelling is your characters, if they find out stuff, I don't know, you should never know more than your characters do.
Yeah. And, a lot of that, when you say they've gone through it twice, it is that speculation confirmation, which is a natural part on the investigation. So it does feel a bit redundant reading, but to me it also felt natural because they're going to say, well, here's our hypothesis, let's go test it. When they had that opportunity, they talk about it again, but Yeah, it's always good to confirm what's going on. So
yeah. But one of the things I wanted to talk about with this book is just to kind of contrast some of the elements with the last book as far as the way it handled female characters and situations that would be tense from a female perspective, and how Ms. Tilton handled those things with much more aplomb and understanding than our previous book. In other words, at no point did Garibaldi recognize a woman by her ass.
mm-hmm. Although I think the vocabulary used in the previous book was that can. I know that can. I've spent so much time studying that can.
Right.
The closest we get to that here is when Ivanova is upset and Garibaldi's comforting her, and he consciously thinks, yes, there's a beautiful woman pressed up against me, but now is not the time.
Which is exactly the kind of, like, I feel like that was a great writing, because if you're a professional with a professional who is emotionally vulnerable, the fact that you are physically attracted to them is not license to take advantage of their emotional vulnerability. And I did like that she took the time to say Garibaldi had the idea in his head to maybe, do something with Ivanova right then, and he wisely decided against it. That is not a good idea right now. Good job, Garibaldi. Thank you for making good choices.
Mm-hmm.
There were a couple other things along the way. At one point, Ivanova gets assaulted, and it mentions that she worried it might turn into a sexual assault scene. And I'm reminded of a podcast I did. I can't remember if it was one of the Marvel episodes. I think it was one of the Marvel episodes we did with Sarah Century. And just in passing, talking about comic stories being gross about, threats of sexual assault. She's like, you don't have to do that because women know that that's always there. That's always a threat. You don't actually have to go there in your stories. And, I just appreciated in the scene, she was worried that would happen, and that's not what that was.
Yeah.
But yeah, we don't get a lot of Sheridan in this. I feel like the writers who are writing this probably still didn't have a whole lot of experience with the character. His episodes probably had started airing at some point during her writing process here, but she wouldn't have had anything other than, I don't know, scripts or treatments or whatever writers are given whenever they're asked to write tie-in novels.
Yeah, novels take time to write. So, this came out sometime in May, so at least 14 episodes had aired before this was released from this season. But that could mean that, maybe when she was hired to do it, they were filming 2 and none had been aired.
Right, because they were releasing in November, end of October going to November. That's a handful of months before this. So, like I said, they probably started airing while she was writing.
Yeah.
Babylon 5 took off during season 1. They decided to start doing tie-in novels. They realized the tie-in novels would come out in season 2, and showrunners like, oh, well, by season 2, we're going to have some change. Well, no, because he wouldn't have known there was some changes. So maybe the Sheridan stuff was a last-minute change along the way. Not last minute, because that was,
Yeah, internally they knew that there was going to be change partway through season 1. And I think one of the reasons we saw Sinclair all the way to the end of season 1, giving what that actor was dealing with, is that they'd filmed the season finale as episode 12. So he had to stick around at least that long.
Mm.
At one point, it was not clear if Michael O'Hare was going to be allowed to finish out the season, or if his character would just not appear in some of the later episodes.
Yeah. Ivanova and Garibaldi are the stars of this. Ivanova probably slightly more so. Certainly the title Accusations is largely relating to the accusations levied against her, and she loses her post. She loses her commission temporarily as a result. And it was, I thought, really interesting to see her responding to that. She gets really drunk. She almost makes some mistakes with I can't remember if he was an officer or just somebody who was spending time on the station at the time. And I say mistakes not to judge her sexual choices, but because they were the sorts of things that she would have regretted the next day. And her good friend, Mr. Garibaldi, knew that and kind of stepped in with him to warn him off of spending the night with her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a nice moment where, Garibaldi basically says what she actually needs, regardless of what she asks for, someone to make sure she gets home safe, who then walks away.
Right. Take her to her door. Let her go to bed.
Yeah, I am much happier with the way they've handled these aspects of Garibaldi's character in this book rather than the last one. So I'm
because it's fun. It's fun to have a guy who's a bit of a flirt and a bit of a player. But if he's a good guy, then you want him to be a good guy when the camera's not on him, And he can like the women's, and he can maybe make some choices that don't necessarily treat his relationships well as relationships, but he should treat women well as women, And otherwise he stops being a good guy.
Yeah, there's even one of the differences between the way the two of them are handled is the way John Bornholt wrote the last one. You believe, or at least I believed, that the fact that in season 1 Garibaldi was often in the lift when Tully was going for it would have been him planning and watching her every moment just to be there and spend time with her.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas this, Garibaldi's internal monologue makes note of that weird coincidence about how Tully was always waiting to get on the lift when he was in it.
Mm-hmm.
So this treats it as an accidental byproduct of their schedules and not a deliberate act, which puts Garibaldi in a very different light. And honestly, it's one I prefer, although, may or may not be the actual case when you think of the expression Garibaldi had on his face in those instances when the doors were opening.
Yeah.
So I prefer it, but it's not completely consistent with what we see on screen.
Ivanova also goes through a lot of just internal upset and depression over the fact that she can't do her job. Her job has been removed from her. She might not have any sort of future with Earth Force anymore because what duties she is being given are, she suspects are going to be negligible desk job type stuff. Now, as it happens, Sheridan is smart and puts her in a position to continue to have access to the investigation just from a very tertiary standpoint, because the Raiders are an element of everything. Just no one knows exactly how they play in. So giving her command of Alpha Wing to continue going out there and helping transports against the Raiders does give her access to the situation, just not in any way that Wallace can keep track of, which I liked.
Yeah, I like that too. It did show a nice side of Sheridan here.
Mm-hmm.
We don't see a lot of Sheridan in this, but what we do see is very good.
Yes. Yeah, he's a strong captain, which we've seen on the show. He is very good at his job, and he's very, very aware of his people as personnel assets and what they can and can't do and shouldn't do, and he handles that well.
Also, when he reaches the point where it's, he says, I don't care what orders I got from the Joint Chiefs. I am on this station, and what is happening is not going to happen on my station.
Right.
And steps in and takes command, even though he has been ordered to give Wallace 100% cooperation. He's going, no, this is not the Earth Force I signed up for.
As soon as he gets any sort of justifiable ground to stand on, he stands on it and stands against Wallace. And Wallace is an antagonist that you love to hate throughout this. I think he's done pretty well. He's possibly verging on cartoonish in just how much he insists on his rights for everything, kind of like the admirals in Star Trek who insist on things being done a certain way, but it's largely because they don't really understand the day-to-day operations or because they have ulterior motives or whatever. He's that kind of a character. But I think part of the reason that he's effective is because he does a lot of stuff off camera that our characters have to react to. Like Garibaldi losing access to his files that he very much should have access to as chief of security. and he goes on to do investigations, finds out that he no longer has access to them, or finding out that they're doing psi scans of every single prisoner without consent. That sort of thing. It makes him a good antagonist.
Yeah, Wallace's presence is felt in virtually every chapter, but he might only appear in maybe 7 or 8 of them.
Yeah. And we end the story, not that we have to end our discussion, just talking about the ending. We end the story with the resolution to a lot of the immediate mystery as far as Ortega's and Young's murders, but with a lot of elements left unresolved in the background world building of the story. As far as we are very much given the idea through the course of events that Earth Force and the government are involved with shady, underhanded dealings regarding strategic metals and things that would make, shipbuilding and everything, stuff that's important. And I forget exactly how it's all tied into the Free Mars terrorists, but we don't get a lot of closure on that because that's when the doors get closed in everyone's faces at the end of the story. Yeah,
I don't think there is an actual viable link to the Free Mars terrorists. That was more the excuse they used to keep a lid on it because things were coming out of Marsport. So they were more a scapegoat than an active participant. But yeah, when this is done, okay, we know that humanity did not develop this technology. We have no idea who did. We have no idea how humanity got their hands on it. And I do appreciate the fact that when they found this, they had this visual representation on the nucleus of this element. I like that it was vaguely described.
I did too. There was definitely some science in there. Obviously, element 156. They even say in the story that element can't possibly exist. It would decay immediately. So whatever fictitious science allows it to be usable is something beyond our understanding and beyond what we can do. And that's why it's alien technology.
Yeah. So for those who haven't heard about the stability of nuclei, this is the physics teacher in me kicking in. There's actually 4 forces in nature. So we know about the electromagnetic force for electric charges and magnetism. Most of us know about the gravitational force that keeps us from flinging off into space. The other 2 forces are the weak nuclear force and the strong nuclear force. The weak nuclear force is what handles most radioactive decay, and the strong nuclear force is what holds the nucleus together, because the charges are quite biased towards the positive. You have protons and neutrons is the way most of us think of it. Those are actually not elementary particles, meaning they can be broken down into quarks, but there's a lot more positive charge than negative. The strong nuclear force is what overpowers that electrostatic repulsion to hold the nucleus together, but it has an extremely limited range on the order of about 10 to the negative 15 meters.
So the larger that nucleus gets, the less effective that strong force is at holding it together. So really, really large nuclear atoms can't hold together as easily.
Yeah, so you will actually reach the point where the strong force on the left side of your nucleus cannot reach the right-hand side, but the electromagnetic force has no range. Or no range limits, I should say.
So those positive particles are pushing against each other, and the strong force is not overriding it to hold them together.
Yeah, so the atom ends up tearing itself apart. That's why it's very difficult. In nature, we rarely find, if ever find anything above that atomic number of 100. And the proportionate number of neutrons we need in that nucleus increases to keep it stable. And when we've created the higher elements in the labs, they decay in fractions of seconds.
So when you look at a periodic table, it only goes up to 100 or so. There are reasons why it didn't keep on going up. Nature built atoms that large and could not build them more largely.
Yeah. Plus, there's the whole energy requirement thing. We are a second generation solar system because the Big Bang, then because of the expansion, there wasn't as much pressure as there is later. So the Big Bang did not create any element higher than iron, number 26 on that periodic table. And then a supernova would start producing things higher than iron. Collision of stars would produce things higher than that. So the amount of elements we find in Earth that are higher than iron on that periodic table are a strong indication that we are a second generation solar system, meaning there was another solar system here. That star went nova, And then we formed from the remnants of that, which is why we have our uraniums and our leads and things like that.
Right. So the idea of an element with an atomic number of 156, since ours only goes up to the 1 O's, and like we have tried to make some stuff in the 1 teens that, like you said, decays in fractions of a second. The idea of 156 is fantasy, but the book acknowledges that the idea that this could exist somehow would require some sort of technological creation that we don't have access to the possibilities of. We don't know how to do it.
Exactly. And I like the fact that it's handled that way, where they're, it's like the Stargate SG-1 TV series. There's an episode where there's a black hole on the other side of the Stargate. And, they went to science consultants who said, okay, these things got right. These other elements would, if they were included, they would break the story, but they should be there. So there's a scene where Amanda Tapping's character is going, I don't understand why we're not also seeing these effects. The Stargate must be somehow filtering them. I wish I understood how.
Right. And it's a little bit of a lampshade. You acknowledge the thing and stick a lampshade on it so it doesn't, so we cover it up and then keep on going with our lives. But it is nice to have those things acknowledged.
Yeah.
It's always kind of bothered me whenever science fiction stuff like says, well, this, metal that we've discovered must be alien because it's made of things that don't exist on the periodic table. And my response is always, okay, the stuff that exists on the periodic table is universal. Everyone is going to have those. But the idea that there might be super science that creates larger elements that we've never been able to stabilize is a good explanation for how that could be possible.
Yeah, I prefer when they phrase it as, it's like this, where they're saying it's a higher position on the periodic table than anything we've seen before.
Right.
Because like you said, every element should fit on the periodic table unless it is an elementary particle of some other type and it's not made of protons and neutrons.
In which case there's some element of physics that we don't even know exists yet.
Yeah.
But cool science stuff. And Tilton doesn't go into a whole lot of detail on that, but she does go into enough to make the more scientifically minded among us smile.
Yeah. Yeah, she handles it well. It's, like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, where she refused to divulge any details of how they were breathing life into that non-living matter, because that would be a mistake, because then people might reproduce my horrible, horrible mistake. Right, so find a way to work around it that makes sense in the context of the story. Which, I don't know if we mentioned this. The story is placed just after season 2, episode 9. From what I saw, the wiki page says it's somewhere between the season 2 premiere and the episode we're about to watch. And then the
actual text page in the story that did say place it in relation to the Coming of Shadows.
Yeah. So it's shortly after Coming of Shadows.
Right. Not at the very beginning of season 2 when Sheridan's brand new to the station, but not in the middle of the Centauri Narn War either. Although I think they do mention, because the Centauri Narn stuff starts with the Coming of Shadows, right?
Yes, that's where it really comes out, and there's the official war declaration.
I think there is a brief mention early in the book about how there's tensions arising in that, but it doesn't play into the story at all. The only other significant player in this, because Garibaldi and Ivanova are by far the most significant, Talia is there a few times. And after having dealt with her so heavily in the previous book and her relationship to the Psi Corps, having her just doing her job in this was interesting. She is the ship's telepath, and so she is assigned to fulfill those duties, even though she's not a member of Earth Force. And Commander Wallace has her going beyond what she is ethically comfortable doing. But it's also clear, although we don't actually see it happen on the page, it is clear that he is doing something to give her very little choice in the matter. And the matter is, scanning people's minds without their consent during interrogations. She's not supposed to be doing that, and she does not like that she's being forced to.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a there's a good scene with her and Ivanova towards the end. Because Ivanova doesn't like her. She doesn't like Ivanova. We've seen that in the show. But Ivanova is trying to recall early in the story when they first discover the murder of J.D. Ortega. They find this note written by him that at first they can't even read, but it looks like the word hardwire without the closing E on it. And they don't know what that means. And throughout the course of the novel, although it's mentioned a few times, it's never explained. So she's trying to figure out at the end, and she goes to Talia to say, hey, maybe there's something in my mind and in my experiences with J.D. Ortega that would explain this, because maybe he wrote the note to me. So Talia helps her do some memory. I don't know the verb. But
yeah, maybe retrieval?
Retrieval, yeah. And it's a bit of an intimate process because, as she says going into it, this is going to be more than a surface level scan. We're going to be going into your mind. And it's a bit more intimacy than either of them has been willing to do together. And that feeling of trust and comfort is kind of undone at the end because actually I feel like that little part was a little bit unclear in how it was written. Something happens in the way that Ivanova describes the situation that ruffles Talia's feathers, and the walls are up again between her and Ivanova at the end of that scene. But it is nice to see that they, had some interactions. They sort of briefly overcame their dislike and then went from there.
Yeah, it was a good scene. So,
yeah. Trying to think of who else was in this. Franklin's in a few scenes. He's very Franklin. I felt like it was written very true to. Everyone was written very true to their voices on the show, but Franklin's brief scenes did feel very Franklin. I laughed out loud actually whenever he tripped up Wallace.
Oh yeah, that was his best moment because up to that point, he was the medical examiner. Mm-hmm. There was nothing that really needed it to be Franklin and not some other doctor.
Right. Franklin could have been sick that day and the other person would have been doing their job. But Franklin, yeah. He puts the evidence for that they find on Khatib that links him to the murder. He puts it in the quarantine room. And so when Wallace goes to get it in the quarantine room, the quarantine protocols go into play and knock him out. So yeah, it was pretty great. Basically, Franklin manipulating the situation, playing into Wallace's psychology and using it against him.
Yes. Yeah, it was a great moment, it's nice to see him have that, because one of the issues that you can have with your doctors on these shows is, they do their bit to say this is what's happening and then they're done. John Billingsley used to laugh about that filming Enterprise because, you got paid per episode you appeared in. So for a lot of those episodes, he'd show up one day a week, get the makeup put on, stand over a body and give a 30-second explanation of what happened, and then go home. And between takes, he'd be laughing at the other cast going, hey, same pay, 6-day weekend, see you next week.
I wonder if coming out of Voyager, where the Doctor was such a major story element player in the show, they decided to take a different tack with Phlox, but I haven't watched most of Enterprise since it came on. Actually, I have not watched Enterprise since the show ended.
Oh, okay.
Most of it I only watched. Most of it, like seasons 1 and 2, I watched a few times. Season 3 and 4, I think only watched once.
Okay, yeah, that was similar. But this is not the Enterprise podcast. We can talk about Star Trek perhaps later in another podcast if we should feel like it someday. Maybe. Starting in 2031. Yes. So, yeah, I don't know if there's much else for the League in Session section.
Yeah, I think we've hit all the players and the dynamics. It was a fun read, and the characters were handled well. Stuff that would have been problematic in the first book, I think Tilton did a better job with. There were a couple of things in the book that didn't quite land right, but the vast majority of it was very engaging as we went along. And yeah, I enjoyed the book.
Yeah, as did I. It's a stronger midquel than a lot. Right. One of the issues when you're dancing between the raindrops is that when you pick up this book, this is not going to change any status quo.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The characters that we've seen week in, week out in a book that explicitly states, yeah, this happened between episodes 9 and 10, and we've already seen episode 14 by the time it comes out, you know it's not going to really disturb things. So sometimes that can make it a little bit hard to get engaged, but this does the job.
Yes.
I found it worked well. Like you said, she's got a very good grasp of the characters, so nothing seemed really out of place. You don't get that, ooh, really? But no, this is a good one. And, you know, of the 2 novels we've read so far, if I were told, pick one author to return, this is the author I would pick.
Mm-hmm. And if you were recommending Babylon 5 novels to somebody who's getting the franchise, this would be one I recommended over the other one. A lot of these first 9 get downplayed because they are just trying to tell tie-in stories. They're not expanding on anything. Whereas after these first 9, the novels do story developments that Straczynski authorizes and, you know, declares canon or whatever it is he does. Not exactly sure the nature of all that because we haven't gotten to those books yet. But yeah, I enjoyed this. Talking about dancing between the raindrops, you know, you have to return everything to where it goes at the end. So the best you can do is play with the background of the world and, you know, try to develop stuff with that. Not really develop, but play in the development of. And so with this, I am curious to see if there are any elements that you saw that play into the ongoing world building of the show. I have an idea of what might be there, but we'll see what you have to say. In the meantime, though, we have the last best hope for the novel. So, is there a character or a scene that stood out to you?
I think it would be that scene with Dr. Franklin sticking Wallace in the quarantine that we mentioned. It just was the right button at that time because, you know, Sheridan and Garibaldi find out something. They realize how threatening Wallace is. He's back with the evidence. They run back in a panic, and Franklin's like, no, don't worry, it's handled. I think that was probably my favorite standout moment, largely because, you know, it was Franklin in a way that we haven't seen him before, whereas the rest, when you have something that is consistently good, right, there's neither a lot of peaks nor valleys, so it's hard to pull one out.
Mm-hmm. For me, I think it was Ivanova trying to cope with her loss of her position. She is such a strong and confident, and she's good at her job. You know, she does her job well. She has a snarky personality that comes out sometimes while doing her job. And so much of what makes the character so worthwhile is her fulfilling the role of her profession. And to have that removed from her and to see her as a person struggling with that loss, I thought was handled rather well. Like I said, she makes some choices that aren't really very good for her. And she wrestles internal monologue wise with the depression and the basically looking forward to little or no future. Having been in a similar mindset in recent years, I can heavily relate to having just lost everything that you were building your life on. So yeah, I really like that about her. Second place, though, I just want to once again give Tilton props for handling some gender dynamics scenes, which with much more reasonability than the previous author.
Yeah, she stepped up with that. So
yeah, But that leads us to our giving form to the dream segment. Now, this is with episodes where Blaine has seen the entire show at every episode at least once, and he's rewatched a lot of it, and he's rereading the scripts ahead of the show. He's able to help us say, okay, this is something that plays in the future, and this is something that plays in the future, and not spoil exactly what that's going to be, but just to put a pin in things to say, hey, pay attention to this. It's a little bit more interesting with the novels because the novels are not given the same kind of leeway that the episodes are to build that world. But last book, we had some surprising discoveries on things that do actually hint at future developments that the viewers would not have known yet, but the writers evidently were given information on. So was there anything like that here, Blaine? Did you see any stuff here that plays into the future?
Potentially, yes. There is one moment near the end where Talia is aware of the danger that Ivanova's in, which is consistent with things not yet revealed on the show.
Okay, so just to clarify for the listener, that's right at the end, Lieutenant Miyoshi, in a last-ditch Freddy jumping out of the closet kind of effort, she attacks Ivanova to try to, because I knew you knew something kind of thing, and Ivanova is literally being killed, literally being murdered, and she would not have survived had somebody not arrived to intervene. And it's because Talia senses her distress from afar that she's able to get Sheridan and Garibaldi to go and find her and help her.
Yeah, so that element, as I said, I don't know if Miss Tilton was given advanced knowledge or if she really meant, it must have been because we had just done that deep memory scan, we still had a connection. But yeah, it is consistent with things not yet revealed.
Knowing that that's the case, I would like to think that Tilton intentionally wrote Talia as, I don't know why this happened. I can only guess that it happened because of this. And then they went on with their day,
Yeah.
Because that would be a reasonable reaction from the character to stuff about herself that she doesn't realize yet. Assuming that that's, what's there. Was it the one thing or is there anything else?
Yeah, I'm not thinking of anything else that particularly stands out aside from, we have another piece of evidence in the pile that says Earth Force is not always to be trusted.
Right. And this time has nothing to do with the Psi Corps. It's just Earth Force being shady.
Yeah.
So some things that I wondered about as I was reading, we have heard about the Raiders a lot on the show, with them rarely actually playing into plot relevant information. They're just kind of this vague threat that happens out there, like, and it just makes sense in a world like Babylon 5's universe that there would be basically pirates out there running raids on shipments and trying to make money off of stuff. That makes sense. So I was wondering if any of the stuff with the Raiders, since we actually get to see them a bit more up front, we see their tactics, we capture one of them, if any of that played into that element of the world building. Was there anything there, or is it just kind of she was telling a story best she knew how?
Yeah, I don't recall any episodes where the Raiders are prominent following season 1.
Okay.
So you're right. There was that ongoing arc with that one group of very well-equipped Raiders that were taken care of. After that, like you said, it's not the Raiders, it's Raiders. They are pretty much space pirates. So they are, they are never completely gone, but they're not as prominent as they have been in the past.
Okay.
As we go into the future, the story shifts to, or it continues shifting to what is going to have the biggest impact with the people we know on the station.
And while the Free Mars terrorism stuff is used in the story, she doesn't really do anything new with it. So that's just part of the background of the world that we already know exists. But it was one of the things that as I was reading, I was wondering what would come of it that might play into our building understanding of that aspect of the world. But like I said, she doesn't really build anything with it. Like the first book actually gave us a lot more of the Free Mars stuff than the show had done so far. This book does not really do that. It just uses it as a background element. But yeah, okay. So that is our giving form to the dream. And I guess that basically wraps up our discussion. We are going to be back in a few weeks to talk about the last few issues of the comic book series. Since there is such a large break between broadcast from May to October, the final 3 issues of the 11-issue run were able to be released before the show came back on the air, and the comic series was canceled before Divided Loyalties was broadcast. So we'll talk about those and the kind of stories they told, and Blaine's told me that he has some information on why there never was an issue 12, so we'll talk about that. And yeah, that will be coming at us in a few weeks. So I guess between now and then, they should write us emails and send us other forms of feedback. So, Blaine, how can they do that?
Well, one way to do it is to send an email to Babylon5 30 years later at gmail.com. It is your choice whether you use words or numerals for that. And that can be read on the air in a process we're hopefully familiar with already, because we are very much hoping you've already had a few of these feedback episodes.
Right. You can also leave comments on our websites. The show is posted in two places. The first of which is my podcast website called johnreadscomics.com. And there is no H in posted. So you can just look up the episode and leave a comment there.
And all of my podcasts are posted at bureau42.com, which again allows comments and discussion on that website.
You can also leave reviews for the show. We do enjoy getting podcast reviews. Every podcast enjoys getting reviews. We check Apple Podcasts every time we get ready to do a feedback segment to see if there are any reviews there. If you like to leave reviews on a different podcatcher, that is fantastic. We appreciate it. Just drop us a line through one of the other venues to let us know that that's there if you would like us to read it and thank you for it on the air.
The last place where you can conveniently get a hold of us is in the YouTube channel, where all of our episodes are automatically cross-posted. So you can leave comments and feedback there.
All right. So do be back with us in a few weeks for the for the third and for now final comics discussion episode. We'll discuss issues 9 through 11. That's going to come at you in September before we get new episodes again in October. So until then, as always, thank you very much for listening.
And good eating to you.